as I always say to all of you, a huge welcome to you all, and delighted to see you. So we've got a real treat in store for you today in the form of Wendy Jackson-Hill. So she's a Super Trooper. And what is interesting about Wendy's life is it's been lived partially in South Africa and partially in the West Country. And I think she's now in Kent. And she has lived a life of ministry, I think that's the correct expression, since she was ordained in Durban in 2001. So I really want to talk to her all about that, because when I had a chat with her prior to this conversation we're having now, she certainly has had a very, very interesting life. And that's the that purpose of all of these All About Me events that we do, is that we find interest in other people's lives, the rich tapestry of the way that they've lived their life. So Wendy, coming to you, tell me a little bit about what led up to your ordination in Durban in 2001. How did that come about?
Tricia, I'd always sort of had the feeling that I had a calling, a vocation. But back in those days, of course, women weren't ordained as priests. So I just carried on doing my usual stuff in the church, the Sunday school teaching and Mothers Union and guilds and that kind of stuff. But eventually we had a priest who recognized my vocation, and then they started talking about ordaining women. And so he said to me, come on, it's time you started to study. So I signed up for a correspondence course with a college in Johannesburg. And after 3 years, I've completed my 13 subjects, and I was ordained deacon after 2 years and priest after 3 years. And I got ordained to work in my parish as what they called a community priest. So I didn't get paid, and but I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I just felt that there was something missing. I wanted to actually be a proper priest. And then we decided to leave South Africa and come to the UK. And I started doing some fishing around to see if I could get a job as a priest in the Church of England. And I did that just through answering an ad in the Church Times, and got this beautiful post in a lovely little Devon village called Sandford near Exeter. I was so happy there. It was absolutely lovely. And but it was a part-time job again. And I only worked 3 days a week, which was quite nice. But again, the restless spirit came, and I thought, no, I want to do this full-time. And spoke to the bishop, and he said, well, we're not employing priests full-time anymore because we haven't got any money. The situation is not much different now in the Church of England. And but he said, I'll see what I can do. And about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from the Archdeacon of Exeter to please meet him in the cathedral. And he was offering me a post in Plymouth. So I said, well, let me go and have a look at it. So my husband and I went and had a look, and we liked it. And so I moved to Plymouth. And I was there in a big parish for 10 years. Very happy 10 years, and then had to retire because at the age of 70, you have to retire from full-time ministry. So now I'm happily retired in lovely Kent.
Okay, so that's the sort of trajectory of your involvement with the church at that level. But what stimulated the move from how long had you lived in South Africa, and how did you come to make the decision to come back to the UK?
I was born in South Africa, in Durban, and very happily lived there. I met a man, Dave, his name was Dave Jackson, and he was from England. He'd gone out with his company when he was 21, and he was allegedly staying for 3 years, but he ended up staying until he was 70. We left South Africa on his 70th birthday. We had 2 lovely daughters, and they both decided to get British passports and to come and live in the UK. And I missed them terribly. I really did. And I said to Dave, come on, I want to go and live in England. And he said, no, you can't afford it. So I said, I'll get a job. He was retired by that stage. And so again, onto the internet, I've never been on it before, and found the Church Times again, and found these ads. And I applied for about 3, I think, and 3 of them said, no, we don't employ women, we don't approve of women's ministry. But I got one who said, oh, we haven't had a priest for 10 years, we'll have anything. It didn't matter what gender I was. And I'm still great friends with that church warden. And yeah, that's what brought me to the UK.
Okay, so were you, had you visited the UK a lot? I mean, how much of a culture shock and change was it to go from Durban, which is quite a sophisticated city really in South Africa, to quite a very small place in Devon? Sounds a bit Vicar of Dibley, really.
It was a bit. Well, Durban was always known as the last British outpost. We were very British, very colonial. And I came to England first on my honeymoon in 1964 to visit Dave's parents. And then I came over again for my elder daughter's wedding. But that was all I knew about England. And a few people warned me when they knew we were thinking of coming over, and they said, you'll never be accepted, especially into a little village. They won't like you. And I thought, well, if the doors swing open, then it's meant to be. And every door literally swung wide open. We sold our house within 2 weeks of putting it on the market, which was unheard of. We sold 2 cars and most of our possessions, packed up, and two months after deciding to come, we were here.
Wow.
It was a bit of a whirlwind, but I've never regretted a moment of it.
So you landed in Devon, which must have been, you know, almost like landing on an alien planet. I mean, I'm not being rude about Devon.
No.
I'm just contrasting, you know, where you come from to where you landed up. And you say, you know, here was some parishes that hadn't had representation, hadn't had anybody like you. So they were sort of. Were you welcomed with open arms?
I was, yes, it was amazing, really, really amazing. Got invitations to dinners and tea parties, and it was really, really, different from South Africa, but really lovely.
Okay, so that's nice to hear, actually, that you were welcomed, that people didn't find it challenging, the fact that you'd come from South Africa and so on.
No, I think they thought I was a bit of a novelty,
right?
Because I talked funny, and I did funny things that were not normally associated with English people. But no, the welcome was amazing.
So what do you mean by funny things? You did funny things?
Well, I would sort of be a bit informal in a service. I would sort of break out and chat to people, wore probably different vestments. I wasn't too radical.
Okay, but even so, they accepted you, and then you got this opportunity for something that you really wanted, which was much more of a full-time role. Is that right? After 3 years.
Yes. Oh, yes. I then became priest in charge of the church, and so I did everything there. Chaired all the meetings, did all the visiting, ran all the services. With help, of course. I had a very efficient reader who I think might be in the audience at the moment, and made a lot of wonderful friends there.
The other thing that happened to you, your husband died. So when did he die?
He died in 2007.
So how long after you arrived did he die?
4 years.
Okay.
Going on 5 years, yeah.
And you told me in the first conversation that we had, you also lost your daughter, is that right?
Yes, Tanya died 2 years ago.
Oh, she just died 2 years ago, which is incredibly sad. So you've had some very major life events during that time, and but when your husband died, you decided to do internet dating. So
Yes.
I'm always fascinated by people.
You haven't forgotten anything, have you?
Well, there were, when I was chatting to you, I loved talking to you, and you were such an interesting person. You've had such an interesting life, but I think it's your spirit that shines through. And I'm full of admiration for people who do internet dating, because I just wouldn't even think about it. I wouldn't even dream of it. You know, it's really I don't know why.
I had some scary experiences. That could be the subject for another talk, I think.
Just tell us one or two of those experiences that you had, because I just think it's incredibly brave. So you know, I mean, how many frogs did you kiss before you met your prince?
Probably about 6.
Okay.
I stopped keeping track after a while. I met one for a drink at a pub near my house. I was always very careful that I didn't stray too far from home. And one of the first things he said to me was, well, if the path to your bed means I have to become a Christian, then count me out. And I said, okay.
I love the expression, the path to your bed.
Yes, I know. So that ended very quickly. And then there was another one who'd had the very sad death of his wife and couldn't bring himself to get rid of the grand piano that was in the very small front room, and couldn't bring himself to get rid of her ashes, inter her ashes anywhere. And so he begged me to please do the latter for him. And so one Saturday morning, we tramped out into the middle of Dartmoor, and on the way to this place, he told me that he was seriously ill. He had very severe diabetes, and the chances were that he could collapse. And I said, what? You brought me here, trekking out to this place, little mountain, to go and scatter Jenny's ashes, and you could die. Anyway, he didn't, and we got to the top of this little hill, and he said, right, this is where I want you to scatter the ashes. I said, no, we can't, because it's blowing a gale, and there are people having their picnic here, and all the ashes are going to fly back to their sandwiches and their coffee. So we had to go around the other side of the mountain to do that. And then we went and had lunch at a pub, and he went and got a Coke for himself and a glass of wine for me, and then proposed a toast to our future. I said, no future. And then one of them lived in Portugal on a yacht, after telling me that he lived in Plymouth, and that ended up very, very sadly and very badly. And then I swore off internet dating for a while, but went back on, and I found Tony. And I was very blessed to find him. I paid the full price of £30 to join the site again, and he got an absolute bargain. He'd been watching the site and he'd seen me, but he didn't pay up until there was a special offer going, and he got me for £1.
I absolutely love that. That's such a brilliant story. So how long have you been married to Tony?
We got married in 2014, so it's 2012. He tells me 9 years. And we've been on lots of lovely
and correcting it.
We've been on lots of lovely holidays, several cruises, and I'm now enjoying our retirement beautifully. Yeah. Very lucky.
Okay, that's a nice happy ending to that story.
Oh, yes.
You know, the various frogs that you had to kiss before you found your Prince Tony. That's lovely. So let's go back to your time in Plymouth. So you moved from Sandford, your little village in Devon, and moved down to Plymouth. So what was the sort of change like there? Like, you know, was that a significant change?
It was, because from working just 2-3 days a week, I was now working 6 days a week, one day off. And it had been a very sad parish, because they'd lost one of their dearly loved priests. She was no sooner ordained when she got stomach cancer. And so that was very sad for her. And there'd been several things that had happened. And the bishop, when I thanked him for giving me the job, he said to me, the parish has had so much sadness and they just need a lot of TLC. And Wendy, I think you're the one to give it to them. So I think initially it was building up relationships, really. There were a few people there who wouldn't receive communion from me because I was a woman. But thank God, after a few weeks, they all came around and they all took communion from me, which was very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a busy parish, but lovely.
Okay, good. And that's an interesting comment about the resistance to female ministry.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And I always think it's ironic because women have always played an enormous role in the church, usually in the background, but keeping going, you know, not least being the wife of the vicar. You know, the flowers, the women that go in and do all the cleaning and the flowers, all that kind of thing. So women have always been incredibly important in that arena, but until now not acknowledged and not given the kind of responsibility and role that you had there. And as I said, I think that the irony is huge. But, thank goodness now it's much more acceptable. And
in some parts, there's still some hubs that are resistant.
Yes, yeah, well, that's inevitable, I suppose. People take a while to adjust, don't they, to the new realities, let's put it that way. So this morning you sent me some wonderful stories, and I'm sure the people listening to this would love to hear some of those stories. So let's start off with some of the sadder stories that you have to tell, because you've all sorts of things have happened to you since you've been you know, a priest. So tell us some of those.
I think the saddest have been obviously funerals, and it always worried me. The one thing that did worry me about becoming a priest was my bladder is very close to my eyes. I cry very, very easily. And I thought, oh my gosh, when I see other people crying, I'm going to cry with them, which is okay in private, but not when you're doing their funeral. So that really worried me. And one of the first funerals I had to do in South Africa was a dear friend of mine. And that was hard. But I got through it with the help of God. And then the other two that really spring to mind was a tiny little stillborn baby. And she, when they took her out of the hearse, or they actually had a car, not a hearse, it was just like a tiny shoebox. So I'd never seen that before, and that really got to me. And then the next one was a little girl of 9 who was standing on the pavement in Plymouth, waiting to get into the car for the mum to take her to school, when there was an explosion in a house. A boiler exploded, and of course the explosion blew out all the bricks and mortar, and this little girl got buried on the pavement, and she died very shortly afterwards. And I was asked, because they lived in our parish, I was asked to do the funeral. It couldn't be in our church because we knew it was going to be such a big funeral. So it was held in the Minster Church in Plymouth, hundreds and hundreds of people. And to see, I think the hardest thing there was to watch the journalists and the photographers just lining the route from the hearse to the church door and really honing in on people's grief. That was really, really hard to see. So yeah, those were the two really sad times.
Yeah, I think the death of any child baby is just awful. When I had my oldest daughter, one of my friends had a sudden infant death. So you know, can you imagine groups of women? We were part of the NCT, and we were all together, and we all knew each other really well, and we'd all just had children. You know how hormonal you are when you just had a baby, and one of them died, and you know, just literally sudden infant death, no explanation for it or whatever. I think nowadays I think they know, you know, to put babies on their backs, not their fronts, and all that kind of thing, which we didn't do in that day. But the funeral for that baby was just heartbreaking. It was horrendous, and I shall never forget it. how sad it was. So, I mean, obviously we can empathise with that enormously and understand that for you actually having to conduct that service must be very, very difficult. But let's move from that to some of the funnier stories that you have to tell, some of the amusing things that happened to you. More Vicar of Dibley, perhaps.
Well, when I went to Devon, to Sanford, I decided to do a Vicar of Dibley thing and to have a pet service. But I was told by the ladies who did the church cleaning that I couldn't have it inside the church because they'd had a priest who did that once before, and some animals had really made a mess of the church. So, okay, Wendy, you can have it, but you've got to be outside. Okay, fine. So we gathered, and there was actually a horse, I think there was a donkey, and there were umpteen dogs and some cats in their carriers, guinea pigs, rabbits. I think somebody brought a snake along in a box. And while I was talking, getting ready to bless all these lovely animals, I felt my cassock being tugged. And I looked down, there was a little boy there with his brother, and he wouldn't stop pulling at my cassock. And eventually I said, yeah, what do you want? He said, we've got some piggies at home. I said, oh, how nice, because I knew he lived on a farm, so they would have had some pigs. He said, yes, and they're in the freezer, which wasn't exactly what I'd expected to hear. So, you know, they say don't work with animals and children. And then in Plymouth, I suggested a pet service there, and I was allowed to have it in the church because we wouldn't have had horses and donkeys coming to that. But that one couple brought along their 3 King Charles Spaniels. And these Spaniels were very, very badly behaved. They obviously weren't used to coming to church, and they barked at each other and they snapped at the other animals. So eventually I had to say, please, will you take them out? And I sort of felt a bit bad, you know, like excommunicating your parishioners' dogs, but it had to be. And other funny things was, again, with funerals. We had an undertaker in Devon who looked like Charlie Chaplin, and his suit was always too big for him, and the sleeves always hung down here, and his trousers were too long. But what a lovely guy he was. And the one day I was doing a funeral for one of the parishioners, and Andrew said to me as I met the hearse at the church gate, Wendy, have you ever done a funeral with a willow casket? So I said, no. He said, well, just a word of warning, just be prepared. When we put the coffin down on the bier, there are going to be some crackling noises. And he said, don't get a fright. It's not the body moving, it's the willow branches crackling. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. But sure enough, when I got down to the front of the church and they settled the casket on the bier, it did crackle. And it was a bit of a problem to keep a straight face at that. And, you know, people, they expect the vicar to always be in control.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's not possible. And there was one particular day when a much loved man had died, and I'd been visiting in hospital, and I was with his wife when she told me he died. And the day before the funeral, she said, would I please go with her to visit him in the chapel of rest? So I was very involved with them. And at the end of the service, I hadn't asked what music was going to be played. And we started to walk out of the church, and the music was Bright Eyes. And that has always been a song that has made me feel sort of a bit emotional. And I started to cry. I mean, not a full-blown weeping, but crying. And as I got past one of the last pews in the church, one of the ladies there, in a very loud stage whisper, said to her friend next to her, look, the vicar is crying. And I thought, yeah, is that so wrong?
Yeah.
But it was a lesson, make a note to self, always find out what music is going to be played.
Yeah. I mean, if it was me, I wouldn't have a problem with that at all, because it just shows just what an amazingly warm-hearted and kind person you are, and you know, you were involved in the family, and I think it's a bit like you know, doctors not being allowed to cry, but doctors are also human, you know, and they get moved by situations, and clearly, you know, that moved you as well, and I think it reflects well on you rather than badly, in my view. I'd much rather have a vicar that cares enough to become emotional than one that was stony-hearted, let's put it that way. So did you have any choice about retiring, Wendy? You retired at 70.
No, you have to retire from full-time ministry at 70. It's almost a bit ageist, isn't it?
It's very ageist, as are a lot of things, yeah.
But I suppose it's understandable. I mean, you could have vicars staying on in parishes forever and ever, and they actually passed it. So I suppose and I've been very lucky here, because after 6 months you can apply for the bishop's permission to officiate. And I went for the interview with the bishop of Bishop of Dover, and he gave me permission to officiate, which means I can do the communion services, I can do weddings, funerals, baptisms, and all of that kind of stuff. But the beauty, of course, now is I can be selective. I can say, well, I don't want to do funerals, because since Tanya's death, my daughter, I don't feel strong enough emotionally to do funerals. But so I can say no.
That's almost like the best of all worlds, isn't it?
It is. Oh yes. I still feel fulfilled. I love taking services, and but I can say no, I don't want to do that.
No, I can really understand that, and you know, you obviously still feel a huge connection with the whole the whole world of that, you know, ministry, the whole world. That way, and yet you can dip in and out, but you don't have to do it, which you say it's a nice balance.
Yes.
And when I spoke to you before, you're now in Kent. You were thinking possibly moving back to the West Country. Are you still thinking along those lines?
We are thinking about it. There's a retirement home that the Church of England has, or retirement complex that they have in Exeter, and that would be close to Tony's family. And he's got 1 great grandchild and 2 more coming this year, in May, June time. And so it would be nice to be closer to them. And my other daughter, Pam, she lives in Guernsey, and it's far easier to fly to Guernsey from Exeter than from here. But I don't know if I'm actually ready to go into that kind of environment just yet. So they've actually offered us a place. 2 weeks ago, they emailed to say that there's a place coming vacant in the next few months. Do we want it? But we haven't even been able to go and see the place. So we've said, no, not yet, but please keep us on the list.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's quite a big moment, isn't it, when you go from the kind of life that you're leading at the moment into something that's very much to do with retirement and all that entails. I mean, it will be it sounds like it will be the right decision for you at some point, but you're not quite.
I'm sure it will be, one at some time. At the moment, it just seems a step too far, too quickly.
I completely understand that. Wendy, that was just brilliant. I love talking to you, and you know, it just shines out of you, really, the kind of person that you are. And I'm sure those people that had the delight to have you as their person in ministry in their area was extremely lucky. So thank you for that, for all of that. It was really lovely to talk to you. So some questions from Bryony.
Yes, we've had quite a few questions. So Pat would like to know, Wendy, what parish were you in Plymouth?
The parish of Southway.
She said that she used to attend St. Andrews.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's the church where that funeral was, St. Andrews. Yeah.
Okay. Lots of questions about sort of locations. Rosie would love to know where in Durban you lived, Wendy.
I lived in a suburb called Woodhaven most of the time, which was near Yellowwood Park.
Mm.
And as a child, I grew up in a suburb called Woodlands, which was quite a big suburb. And then when I got married, moved to the North Beach area, and then back to Montclair, which is near Woodlands, and then to Woodhaven. So I didn't move very far from my roots until I left South Africa. And then I've been on the move ever since.
And then a couple of questions that were similar from Margaret and Dorothy. They'd both like to know how you dealt with discrimination due to your gender, and do you feel that there's still some resistance to women in the ministry today?
It was difficult. In our parish in Southway, there was, as I said, 5 people who said that they wouldn't receive communion from me. And I said, well, that's okay. You know, nothing I can do about it. I'm sorry that you feel that way, but I'm here for you in every other aspect of ministry. And so it was lovely for me when they came to me one by one and said, we have decided we're cutting off our noses to spite our faces. We will receive communion from you. So that was really lovely. But the sort of thing that upset me was going to things where the clergy were involved. And I would walk in with my robe over my arms and my stole, and I would greet everybody. You know, we South Africans are very friendly people. And I'd get absolutely blanked by some of the clergy who I later learned were anti the ordination of women. So that was tough. And I thought, well, just don't let it get to you. Just remain the smiley, pleasant person. And it seemed to work. After a while, they would greet me. So yeah, it is still pretty prevalent in some places. There are little hotbeds of what they call forward in faith. That's the branch of the Anglican Church or Church of England that is anti-women in ministry. And then the evangelical wing, they are also a bit opposed to us. But you just live with it.
Yeah, of course. And then Rosie was wondering, I know you mentioned that you can still step in for weddings, etc. Can you still step in to cover services when needed?
Yes, oh yes. And at the moment, I'm doing just about all the services here on Zoom.
And how's that been?
It was scary in the beginning. I thought, I don't want anything to do with this. I don't know. But it's worked well. And we're getting about between 40, 45 people at a communion service on a Sunday morning. And we're very lucky. We've got 2 self-supporting priests and 2 retired priests and 2 very, very good readers. So between us, we are managing to keep things going. I sort of do the Zoom thing. It's sort of become my thing. But yeah, I can do anything that any other priest could do.
That's amazing.
But I've got to have my annual or a 3-yearly safeguarding course done and get your certificate for that.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'll hand back to Tricia now. Thank you.
Thanks, Bryony. So Wendy, it's my very great pleasure to say thank you for a really enjoyable hour. We've nearly been together 50 minutes or so, and as I said at the beginning, I love these all about me sessions that we have, because it's a window onto somebody's life, and you've obviously had an incredibly interesting life, a very varied life, and you're still in fact having a very interesting and varied life, and you've created an enormous amount of that yourself by being open to the possibility of change and and also of ministry, which, as I say, I salute you for that 100%. So thank you. That was absolutely delightful.
Can I just say that I believe in God incidences. And can you believe that of all the participants, for me to get into a breakout room with was my friend from Umhlanga area, north of Durban, who she reminded me, has known me for about 40 years, long before I went into the ministry. and we ended up in the same breakout room. I mean, how weird was that? Amazing. And I can see some other friends of mine that have joined as well. So it's been great to be on here. Thank you, Tricia. And thank you for everything you've done for us.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say.
Really kept us all going and kept us all together. So thank you for that.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. You know, a bit like you in what you do, you get a lot of pleasure out of it. Well, I get a huge amount of pleasure out of this myself. So that was lovely. Thank you very much indeed. And goodbye, everybody. And see
Bye, everyone.
you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.